And now joining me is Voice of America correspondent Jessica Stone, live from New Delhi, who has been kept following the G20 summit on the ground. Jessica, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
So I'm going to ask you, the group of G20, the group of 20 economies now have a communique. So how did they reach it so quickly, and what's the reaction in the U.S.?
Well, it did come about very quickly. In fact, by 3 p.m. on the day one of the G20, they were already briefing us about a communique that had been agreed to, not signed, but agreed to by all the parties. And really the main way they got there is by India's leadership in getting the Global South to agree to put forth some language that was palatable to the United States and Europe in particular over the issue of Ukraine. Bloomberg is reporting that India, Indonesia, Brazil, and South Africa, so 3 BRICS countries there, came up with the language, and certainly Washington took softer language. This is quite a bit softer than the Bali Declaration in terms of the position on Ukraine. It's no longer a war against Ukraine, it's a war in Ukraine in terms of the language, which obviously has some gray area left in there for who caused the war. There's no mention directly of Russia, as you probably have noticed. But what was really amazing here is that with the absence of China and Russia at these meetings, in terms of their presidents in any case, you really saw India step into that void and bring consensus when there was real doubt about whether there would be a communique. Remember how close it was in Bali? It could have been that close this time.
And as you mentioned, President Joe Biden was present at the G20 summit along with its U.S. allies and partners, but the presidents of China and Russia were absent. So is Mr. Biden gaining leverage from this? Also, what can you tell us about the U.S.-led multinational rail and ports plan linking India to the Middle East and Europe?
Yeah, out of that void that China left, you really saw the U.S. Also step into that with this infrastructure announcement in conjunction with India, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Israel, and Europe. This is going to be a very ambitious project. We have very few details on how long it's going to take, on how much it's going to cost, on who's going to pay for it. But it would be a rail and sail link, essentially, between Europe through the Middle East to India. Some of this is existing infrastructure that will be repurposed. Some of it has to be new infrastructure that will be built. But for the United States, they are making the point that this is a non-coercive, transparent means of funding these large infrastructure projects. Who does that sound like? Maybe China's Belt and Road.
And Jessica, and what does an apparent rift in the G20 mean at a time when Russia and China are seemingly forging closer ties with BRICS?
I think it's very clear that India showed that those rifts can be overcome, that they can make the point about what's going on in Ukraine and about the aggression occurring there, its impact on the global economy and the global food supply, without the type of language that was used in Bali. And that allowed it to be signed off on by Russia and by China. And it sort of shows that the G20 is still a relevant body that can be used to counter the likes of aggressive behavior by any one of its members.
And before you go, Jessica, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is apparently planning a trip to Russia sooner rather than later to meet President Putin for talks on weapons. How are world leaders responding to this, including President Biden?
Well, there hasn't been a statement by President Biden about this. We understand that Kim Jong-un is going to go to Vladivostok to attend that Eastern Economic Forum that Russia is holding, and that is the most likely location where he would meet on the sidelines with President Putin. Vice President Harris, however, has addressed this possibility. She said, quote, "Such a meeting would be a huge mistake." National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan also addressing it, saying North Korea will pay a huge price in the international community, so inferring that not just potentially American sanctions could be doubled down upon, but that the international community will frown highly on this. And the White House also believes that Russia's seeming need to even entertain a conversation with North Korea in order to obtain more weapons for Ukraine is a sign that the sanctions are biting deep and motivating this kind of contact between these two countries.
All right, VOA correspondent Jessica Stone, thanks for your coverage.